Hello, and this is Professor Gruhn. I think we're about into the third week now in our PHP programming class. Hopefully you've completed Module 1, you're well into Module 2, and you're even considering Module 3 by now. So Module 1 is Chapters 1, 2, and 3 and a couple of extra assignments, and then Module 2 is Chapter 3 and 4. I'm going to be talking about focusing on chapter 5 in the book. But before I do that, we're going to look at 4, and then I just really, at a real high level, I want to talk about design patterns real quick. This is not a computer science class, and if you are a computer science major in a undergraduate school, four-year college, or in a master's level, you would definitely be required to know and understand design patterns, and in the 8 weeks that we have here, we don't have a lot of time to talk about all the different design patterns that are out there and everything. And there's definitely appropriate places for when to use what, and also different companies and different programming teams follow different. They just like one better than the other because they feel it meets their needs. One of the things that gets introduced in Chapter 5 in our book is the design pattern called MVC, which stands for Model View Controller. And with that, because it's using instead of using just a normal kind of function procedure approach, and it brings up the whole area of design patterns, I thought at least we should Google it real fast. So if you Google programming design patterns, and of course Wiki's got a whole lot on it, but here was a link that I kind of liked, and it talks about what are design patterns. Design patterns are optimized, reusable solutions to programming problems that we encounter every day. A design pattern is not a class or a library that we can simply plug into a system. It is more than that. It's a template. It's a template that it has to be used and implemented in the correct solution. And it's not a design pattern can be used across many different languages. And it really is just that. It's a pattern, and it's basically a way that you lay out your code. This page further talks about structural, creational, and behavioral design patterns and why we should use each one, and kind of gives some different examples for each. The strategy pattern, the adapter pattern, the factory method pattern, decorator pattern. So we could focus, spend a lot of time from a computer science perspective on all of the different design patterns that are out there, but we're not going to. But I wanted to make you aware. And if you have a few minutes, do a quick Google search on programming design patterns, and in about an hour's time you can get a good understanding of it. I like to think of design patterns as basically has a methodology or an approach to where you put your stuff, and how you access your various components of your programming language. Now, that said, in Chapter 4, and let me pull up. So just let you know, I have my XAMPP up and running, and start, and my MySQL is up and running. And let's pull up my browser. And here I go to my local host, and I'm going to dig right into the solutions. So I know that basically the goal for your homework assignments is to start off with the example starts. And what's happening here? Oh, do you know what? I actually didn't. Okay. I actually turned those guys off. So let's do it again. And so now you guys are given a bit of code and the starts, and you can see that what they have is pieces of it working, but then what the assignments want you to do is to finish it. And the book also provides you the answers in EXE solutions. And my I don't want you just to jump right into exe solutions and hand them in and just cut and paste and hand them in because you don't learn anything there. But I would like you to start off with the starts. A couple today, matter of fact, I think Dan said, I got up to step 5 and that one was really throwing me. So I cheated and I looked at the solutions. And that's okay because sometimes you need to look at an existing answer to see how it's done. Um, and that's for this class and what we're trying to accomplish. The goal isn't to try to force you to think and force you to think in such a way that you spend hours and hours making mistakes. I would rather say, how would you solve it? Try a couple of things real quick, and if that doesn't work, then take a look at the solution for it. So in Chapter 4, we have a bunch of code that we can see that the categories are listed here. We can add a product. We see a listing of the various instruments for guitars. We have now I click on basses, we see the basses, and drums, I see the drums. So, and then I can actually list the categories. And if I want, let's see if I see trumpets, and I can even add a category. And then when I go back to the main page, you can see that trumpets is now there, and I don't have any trumpets. So, so I can add a product, and I'm going to add a trumpet, and it's going to be TR1003, and then con student, and it's going to be $450. If I add the product, now the product is there and I can delete it. So hopefully by now you've got a good handle on the basic functionality. And this is basically Crud Operations, where you create, you read, you update, and you delete. Create is adding a new record. R for Crud, reading a record, and your reading date records. U, updating, is changing and modifying. And then D is deleting a record. So this is teaching you your basic CRUD operations to a database. Now, what's interesting here in Chapter 4, if we take a look at Explorer, so I'm going to pull this up. Let's see, go to my E drive. Find my HT docs. And if we go to Chapter 4, we see that the NB project folder is basically the NetBeans metadata for NetBeans, the fact that it's in NetBeans. But as you can see, all of the programs, all of the files are listed in one folder. Your index PHP and error handling, the deleting a product, deleting a category, the database error, the database connection, listing the category, adding the product form, adding the product PHP, and adding a category. All of the code is all in one area. And even the CSS is in the same folder. So they just said, I put it all in one place. Now for something as small and as simple as like this, it makes sense. It's easy. But now think about a full-blown accounts receivable, order entry, inventory control, and this project, the Guitar Shop project, had a lot larger perspective. Now we go and take a look at what Chapter 5 has done. And Chapter 5 now, what you see has compared to Chapter 4 is, as a matter of fact, let me pull up another Windows Explorer. So here's Chapter 4. and here's chapter 5. Now what's happened is they've organized the pages a little differently, and all of the stuff isn't in the main page. Index.php is in the main folder, and index.php is still in the main folder. But now we have this category called View, and this folder called View. If I click on Chapter 5, and I can see a category nav, a footer, and a header. Doesn't that look a little familiar? That's actually the same stuff that we had put in the INC folder for Paul's Pet Palace, and then we renamed the INC folder to View to model the model view controller pattern. So the View folder is where you keep the code that you will use to deal with the user experience, the front end. The model folder, this is category DB, database, PHP, and product DB. Notice here we have what we have is add category list. So these are connections. These are actually the SQL statements you'll see, product and category, that get called upon from the actual catalog and product folder. So if I go into product folder, I see I have a product list and a product view and an index page for that. A product manager, I see I have a list and a product add and a product list, a category list and a product list. And then I go back. So what we've done, and then I have the images folder where we're keeping pictures of various instruments in this case. So we have a folder for instruments. We didn't have that before. And we have an errors folder. The errors folder handles, there's two programs, one for the database error and one for just any other type of errors that happen, PHP errors. And the cart, there's nothing in it at this point, just a blank index page. That's for down the road. So at a real high level, MVC, Model View Controller, is taking all of the programs that we created in Chapter 4, and instead of having them in one bucket, one folder, we now have them in categories and in areas. And the biggest is that the controlling product is at the main page, and then each page here, there's groups of controllers. The model is for all of the database information connection, and then the view is for all of the visual stuff. I think in my lifetime I've done 2 MVC projects and only a small part of it. So I know that if you're young and you're going seriously into programming and computer science, you need to understand programming design patterns, and a lot of companies actually require you to know MVC and a few others. And we're going to basically develop this model, use what the book has as a model, and apply it to the PHP project. Now let's pull up NetBeans real quick. And when I'm given a new set of code, so say for instance I've been given the code listed in Chapter 5 here. The first thing I like to do So here I go, solutions, oops. So here I am, Chapter 5 in the Solutions folder, Example 1 Solutions. And I know that the high level page in this folder, 5ex1 sol, that's going to be an index page that's driving this. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at this index page that's driving this display. So now what I'm going to do is I pull up NetBeans. I go to Chapter 5, and I find this main page. So what's interesting here is this amount of code from lines 1 to 13 are providing all of the stuff that we see on the screen. But how's it doing it? And we know that the index.php page is the starting place. We have the file open. The very first line of the code is view/header.php. So what that's telling me right off the bat is it's looking for a program, a PHP program called header.php in the view folder. So let's go to the view folder and let's look at the header program. Look at this. The header program has a doc type, an HTML tag, a head tag, the Guitar Shop in the title. It's referencing some style sheets, the start of the body tag, and then my Guitar Shop. All of this work right here is happening because of this header. So what's happened is the index is calling the header. Now, after this, it looks like basically some standard HTML stuff's happening. No PHP code is happening here. And in there, we see product manager and product catalog, and it's referencing product manager and product catalog. So it's referencing product manager, and it's not a .php. Oh, do you know what that is? Look at that. There's a folder called product catalog and product manager. And if I was to look into those folders, I see there's an index page, a product list, and a product view. And I'm going to go back. I go into product manager, a category list, an index page, a product ad, and a product list. So what happens is in the program, when I click on product manager, I now get all of this stuff. It's in the product manager folder. But how am I getting that? What's driving that? Well, that's a folder level URL here. So at that point, my guess is that the index page in this folder is driving Project Manager. So let's go into NetBeans, go into Product Manager, and let's look at the index page. Now this is doing a lot of work here. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and we're going to look at that in a minute. Let's go back to our index page here. Notice that this menu, Product Manager, Product Category, that work there is happening because of the HTML code in this main block of code here. And then at the very end, we have another include in the view footer. So now if I take a look in view, so let's, I'm using NetBeans, view, I see there's a footer element code. And now what we have is My Guitar Shop Inc. We're echoing a date. We have a copyright. We have a copy tag. And so this amount of code here in this footer file that's living in the view folder is basically giving me that stuff. And I'm curious about one thing. And I'm guessing the main block, probably the CSS in the main block, is giving us these two lines here. We could find that out through the CSS. But the way you go about finding stuff in programming, especially in web development, is always start by looking at the page, finding out what folder stuff is located, and then look for the index page. This index page then drives and tells you where to look next. Then we looked in the view header. We saw that product manager, that in this page, the product manager link goes to a product manager folder. We saw that the product catalog link goes to the product catalog folder. And we saw that the footer include is looking in the view in the footer file. Now, the product manager has a lot of power here, and it has this index page, a category list, a product ad, and a product list. So let's go into NetBeans, and taking a look at product manager, let's look at the index PHP page. So in the product manager folder, this index page is driving this work. My guess, it's going to be calling the footer, it's going to be calling a header. Somewhere we'll see a thing called product list. Oh, look at this. I'm seeing categories, and I'm seeing a list of categories. I'm seeing guitars. I can add a product, and I can list my categories. And if I click on each of these, I can see that the items I have in my system are all listed. Notice here, up in the URL, that when I'm clicking, this information here, this question mark category ID equals changes. So see here, it's 1. Now it's 2. Now it's 3. And now it's 4. So what's happening as I'm clicking each one of these links, it's actually passing some information to an SQL statement, and it's basically saying, get me all of the products that are in the products file that have a category equal to 3, because category equal to 3 is drums. Or get me all the guitars, because guitars are 1. If I list my categories with this list categories that we're passing in here, we can see all of the categories being listed. So if I add a category called flutes, I click here. Now flutes has been added. Let's go back to list products, and notice flutes is added here and was assigned the category ID of 5. As far as your final project, I'll be really happy and excited if you get this level of operations going. That if you have 2 tables, some form of a category table and some form of a detail table, and you're able to add and delete records based upon that, that is enough for this class, given how little time we have and the goal of this class to provide for you an A in the class for your final project. Now, some of your database designs from your last semester, CST230, were a lot bigger and deeper and had a lot more detail in it. Don't try to do it all on this final project. I'd rather have this amount of work that we see here done and completed, and see that you can access your own data tables, do some listing, add a record and delete a record, and then have some fun with it from there. And then, given how much time you have, build upon it. Going back now in NetBeans, in Chapter 5, we know that nothing is in cart. That's just a filler place. There's an errors folder that got created. So if we take a look at error.php, basically we see a standard header include, a standard footer include, and then this div tag given the ID of main, so basically it's relating to the CSS class, the ID main, and then the ID, the CSS type called main, it will make it look like that. And then you'll see the word error will appear, and then a PHP error will be then presented on this page. So when an error gets thrown in some other program, it calls in the error.php file and will actually display the error that got thrown. Also, if there's a database error, the same type of stuff, a header, the footer view, we see database error, and there's some information, and then the error message gets displayed as well. Notice here, also, always be careful. If your footers and headers aren't working, a lot of times that you don't have the relative pathing right. You have to make sure, did you go up, did you go back a couple of folders or up a couple of folders? And sometimes you can't, something's not displaying correctly because you don't go just view header. Sometimes you have to go one or two dots up, or sometimes you might have to go dot dot slash dot dot. It really depends on where it is you're calling. So that's why that's what the errors folder is handling, is a place to put PHP code that you need if you want to throw an error. And then you just know that's where all my error handling stuff is. Now in the model, this database PHP program is pretty straightforward. Basically, it's assigning the database host and database name, the user ID, and the password to 3 variables. Then using the PHP data object function, it's taking the DSN variable, the user variable, and the password variable, and creating a new database object connection. So basically, it does this, and it tries this operation and says, can I connect to this server and this database with this ID and password? And if I do connect, I'm good to go. So I'm going to try it, and if I'm successful, I'm just done. But if my error happens and gets thrown, then what happens there is I'm going to throw an error, and I'm going to go to my database errors page. So let's do that real quick. Let's take this user ID, and I'm going to call it 55, and I'm going to save it. Now let's go back to my page here, and let's refresh. Let's click on guitars. Notice that I'm throwing an error. Access was denied to MGS user 55. That's because that user doesn't exist. So what happened was it tried to execute this connection with the information, this connection string, this user ID, and this password. Now let's change the password. Let's refresh this page. And now it says access denied for this user. And usually you can see it's trying to use a password, but what's happening is that the user is valid, but the password isn't. And that's usually the error if you get a bad password. Take that. Let's save it. And then refresh the page, and look, everything's working fine. Now, what else is living in this model folder? Let's look at category. So here, the category file is actually, by itself, doesn't run. The category file is basically creating a bunch of functions that are going to get stored into memory. So at some point, we'll look at the index page for the product manager, and we have to find out when does category-db get loaded. And basically, it's going to load this function, get categories. It's going to load get category name, and it's going to load add category and delete category. So basically, we want to be able to list. We want to get the name of a category. We want to add a category, or we might want to delete a category. And what you'll see, and this will all look pretty familiar to you, select star from category, order by category ID. So we're basically taking a good old MySQL select statement, we're assigning it to a variable, and then we bind that, we prepare the variable into a statement, and then we execute the statement, and we're going to return those results. And then $statement becomes something I get to do something with. So basically, we're going to, at this point here, we're not passing any information in. We are referencing, we're actually creating this database object, and that's going to be available to us throughout. And we're just basically assigning selects a SQL statement to a variable, and then we execute it. We're doing the same thing here, but at this point here now we're just saying select star from categories, where the category equals this ID. Notice here, this function assignment, we're actually passing in a category ID. Here, we didn't pass in any ID. We didn't pass anything into the to the function. Here, we're going to pass in the name, and we're going to then do an insert. And when we do the insert, my guess is that there's an auto increment to that data table for categories that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we don't have to worry about the auto incrementing, and it's going to become available. And if we know the category ID, we can actually then delete categories that are in our list. So for instance, for Paul's Pet Palace, we basically need this piece of code, and we might change a couple of the names, and we want to be able to add a type of pet, we want to add pets and things like that. Now if I take a look at product, basically product here is on what's that's the database one. Here's product. We have the same thing going on for the product DB. This is living again in the model folder. Model is holding our database commands. We have a function, and this function is going to get the products, and basically we want to read this query statement, select star from products where products category ID equals the category ID that we're passing in. And we're going to order by product ID. And then ultimately we execute the statement, and we're going to return the information that we got back after we fetched all the data from it. So it executes the statement, and then basically this is going to take everything that's in that return value, assign it to the products variable. We can now close the connection to the database, and now we have we can actually close that SQL statement transaction. And now what we can do is, since products is assigned into a variable, we can send products back to whoever called me. We can get a product, we can delete a product, and we can add products. This should look familiar. Insert products and listing the column names and then the values to that. So now what I'm going to do, so at this point, you should already be able to start thinking about some of the operations that you want to do with your final project. So already you should be able to have a couple of web pages, create a view folder, a model folder. Can you connect to the database, and can you go select star against a table and then ultimately print it back? So let's take a look at what's happening in the product manager folder, and we look at this PHP, index PHP. Notice here, the very first thing it's doing is from the model folder, it uses the database PHP, it connects to the database. It's putting into memory all of the functions for the product table. It's putting into memory all of the functions for the category table, the add, the delete, the list. It's not actually executing them, it's just taking these functions and putting it into memory. Now at that point, it then gets to do stuff. So depending on what's going on, action will equal filter, get input, and the action. So if an action variable gets assigned, it will, first, if it's not assigned, the action is list products. And then down here it says, if action equals list products, do this stuff. And ultimately what happens is that here we're calling the product list function. Here we are calling the get categories, and we're getting a category name. And so at this point, all of the functions that got put into the memory are now available to happen based upon what we want to do. If the high-level action is just to list the products, it does all of that work. Now, at some point, boom, 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 boom. Here is, I'm looking at the category list page. Here is the category list. This is showing the header, at the bottom showing the footer, but now what's happening is this program had gotten the category list somewhere, and category here, get categories. This $ categories variable is now a list of categories. Now it's displaying here for each category, loop over, and it's actually creating a little mini form to then display the categories. There's even a little add category button, and we can see that it basically ends up being a form where we get to the action is add category, and here's the form element for the name. So if we come here and we list categories, this is the category list that gets built. And matter of fact, look right here. See this delete code, this input type delete? Basically, it's putting the value delete to the submit button, and it's basically, again, it's looping over for each category. I want you to display the category. I want you to display the category name, and that would be right here, category, right here, echo, category ID. So we're passing in the ID value, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it returns back the name. And then from returning back the name, the next thing it puts next to it is the little delete button right here. So if you have a handle on what Chapter 4 is doing, in that you get to add a record, you get to display records, you get to add a product, you get to add a category and display categories, Chapter 5 is relatively straightforward. In all that it's doing is saying, I'm going to organize where I put certain bits of code. And as I go to the next level, I'm going to do a couple of things before I do database, but a couple of more things with the Paul's Pet Palace. We're going to use the same basic principle in design for Paul's Pet Palace, and I'd like you to be thinking about that for your own final project. I've talked to a couple of students, and I really just want you to don't worry about trying to get all of your dreams, all of your hopes, and all of the things that you think your project's going to be. Just get this much functionality working. Can you get this type of stuff working on your website? And cut and paste some of this code, build your model view controller for your project folder and things like that. So this is a good overview. It's nice to walk through and talk to it. And now, if you haven't read Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 already, please dig into it and spend the extra time that you need to for that. Thank you and have a great day.